Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I will focus my intervention on the democracy dimension of the financial and economic crisis. The date of 15th of September 2008 marked both the first ever celebration of the UN International Democracy Day and the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which precipitated the beginning of the financial crisis. While different trends are emerging, it is difficult to be conclusive on the real impact of the crisis on democracy building at this early stage. Notwithstanding, the crisis provides an opportunity for reform, but this will also depend on the quality of the political institutions and how deep democratic practice and culture has permeated a given country or region. The crisis is both global and systemic. The social costs of the economic downturn fueled by the financial crisis are among the long-lasting consequences that may impact political stability, both in democratic countries and authoritarian regimes. The UN Secretary-General report highlighted the potential for a slowdown in progress towards the Millennium Development Goals, an increase in the cost of achieving them by 2015, and the likelihood of a disproportionate burden on women, as experienced in previous crises. It also stressed that a prolonged recession and insufficient attention to social needs could cause problems of social unrest and weakening governance. The gender dimension of the crisis must be addressed, with women constituting the majority of the poor. The two elements, preventive and protective, of democracy are interrelated in financial and economic crises. When democratic public spaces are weak, their weakness contributes to fueling a financial crisis by absence of transparency and accountability. On the other hand, because of that very weakness, the most vulnerable population, especially the unemployed and those newly made economically redundant, do not have a voice when the impact of the economic crisis is unequally shared within the society. What are the implications of the financial crisis for democracy and in particular democracy building? While the actual impact will depend on the depth and length of the economic recession, nations with a weak democratic tradition may be vulnerable to setbacks over the next few years, and established democracies may also face challenges like the boosting of extremist political forces and anti-immigrant sentiments. Emerging short-term political risks associated with the current crisis are nationalism and political tensions that will pose a challenge to governments in both emerging economies and developing countries. In the medium and long term, democratic institutions play a vital function in enhancing the accountability of governments to the citizens as far as policy responses are concerned. As for the role of political parties, the economic downturn represents a major challenge to the credibility of actors that already garnered, before the financial crisis, low levels of public confidence in polls across the various regions of the world. The crisis has prompted governments and coalitions with different orientations to adopt measures that strengthen the role of the state in the economy. Traditional ideological divides are blurred as a result of the adoption of stimulus packages and other economic measures to face the consequences of the economic downturn. Current multilateral policy debates focus on responses to the crisis and the need for a new international financial architecture. Three aspects are crucial for democracy building. They all revolve around the protective and preventive functions of democratic institutions and practices. First, how to ensure that both national and international responses take into account the role of political institutions and democratic processes in coping with such crises. Second, how to reform the international financial architecture by focusing on accountability and transparency mechanisms in a way that would help prevent the occurrence of future crises. And third, how to make oversight of the implementation of regulatory frameworks more effective at the national level by involving other actors than the executive. The different impact at the national and regional level of the economic downturn on those living in extreme poverty and who, emerged from poverty, face the risk of returning as a result of the crisis should be monitored. In addition, the impact of the crisis on the middle class in emerging economies will be crucial for future democratization prospects and democracy consolidation trends in those countries. International IDEA thinks that international efforts, including at the UN, at monitoring the global impact of the crisis should take into account also its democracy-building dimensions and policy implications to provide analysis for use by partners and policymakers. Such assessments should focus in particular on the role of strengthened democratic institutions and processes in coping with the financial and economic crisis and the political implications of the reform of the Bretton Woods institutions by emphasizing the role of political actors like legislatures, political parties, and civil society organizations. International IDEA is committed to contributing in partnership with the UN to a better understanding of the political dimensions of the crisis, to enhance policy responses both at the national and regional levels and within a reformed international financial architecture. Allow me to conclude by saying a few words about another crisis, the political crisis in Honduras, before concluding my intervention. IDEA strongly condemns the coup d'etat in Honduras that led to the expulsion of the democratically elected President Zelaya. IDEA supports the demand for an immediate, safe, and unconditioned return of President Zelaya to his constitutional mandate, and the diplomatic efforts of sub-regional and regional organizations aiming at re-establishing the constitutional order in the country, in particular those of the OAS, following Resolution 953 adopted by its Permanent Council. And let me conclude by saying that we also welcome the adoption this morning by the General Assembly of the resolution on the situation in Honduras, democracy breakdown, which is indicative of the quick and prompt reaction by the international community that is needed in the face of such critical situations. Thank you, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias.